I'm Joe Bev, and this is the Joe Bev Show. This time on the Joe Bev Show, Yogi Bear in an Uncle Dunkle cartoon, Mr. Jinks as the Untidy Prince, Gary Cooper as Ulysses S. Grant, and the penultimate episode of Brute Ballingham Private Detective The Excruciating Hello, Chapter 11, Adios, mi damos. Coming up on the Joe Bev Show.
Dunkle, what you doing?
Oh, hi, Donnie. Come on over here. I'm filtering out the twigs and bugs from Aunt Rapunzel's asparagus blossom honey.
Asparagus blossom honey?
Yeah, well, we got that asparagus patch out there in the back. In early summer, they make flowers, and the bees come, and your Aunt Rapunzel, she captures the honey that they make in the honeycomb in the hollow log out by the creek.
Is that a long way of saying, do you want some honey, Donnie?
Well, do you want some honey, Donnie?
Filtered or unfiltered?
Well, take your pick.
I pick filtered.
Hey, good choice. That reminds me of the bear that was once roaming in the woods in search of berries, and he happened upon a fallen tree in which a swarm of bees had stored up their honey.
My oh my! What have we here? Some lovely honey, a hollow log filled with it. Asparagus. I'm going back and tell my little bear buddy. Yay!
Well, the bear rushed back to his cave, which he shared with another bear. This bear was a lot more sensible than the first bear.
I barely know what you're talking about.
Well, anyhow, the first bear ran home to the second bear and said,
Hey, little bear buddy! Little bear buddy!
What is it, big bear buddy?
I can barely contain myself. I must tell you.
Tell me what?
I found a hollow log filled with delicious asparagus honey.
Is that anything like asparagus honey?
It's similar but different. Anywho, I came back to share it with you. Come on, let's go, while the bees are out picking up pollen from the asparagus blossoms. Yay! Pretty clever?
Smarter than the average.
Anywho, let's go.
I'm not going out there.
Okay, suit yourself. That's more honey for me.
I'm staying here where it's safe. I've collected enough nuts and berries.
Nuts and berries. Ah, nuts, the nuts and berries.
So the bear hurried back over to the fallen tree and began to nose around the log very carefully to find out if any of the bees were at home. Just then, one of the swarm came home from the asparagus field with a load of sweets. Guess what happened next, Donnie?
The bee flew at the bear and stung him sharply.
That's right.
Yo!
And then he disappeared into the hollow log. Well, the bear lost his temper in an instant.
What's this? What an insult to be stung when I only wanted to take a little bit of honey. You have so much in your log.
And then the bear sprang upon the log, tooth and claw, trying to destroy the nest. But this only brought out the whole swarm.
Yo! Yikes! It's a whole swarm! Yo! You! Ow! Hooch! 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 Ouch! Oh! Yay!
The poor bear had to take to his heels, and he was able to save himself only by diving into the creek.
You want to know something? Nuts and berries don't sound so bad after all.
Once upon a time, there was a terribly untidy prince who always ignored his parents when they asked him to clean up his mess. The neighboring kingdom's princess, who he was secretly in love with, organized a lavish ball and invited all the princes from the nearby lands. The untidy prince was excited.
I shall prepare myself with great care.
However, on the day of the ball, his room was so messy that he couldn't find his invitation.
Oh my, what a mess. Whoever lives here is a terrible slob. Oh, wait a minute. It's me. I'm such a slob.
He searched and searched desperately.
Oh, where can it be? Oh, somewhere in this grand mess is the key to my future happiness.
But it was nowhere to be seen. So he decided to tidy up his entire room.
Oh, clean it shall be, so all can see how happy I will be.
After making his room spotless, he found his invitation.
Oh, wait a minute. Here it is. It's been in my hand all along. How silly of me.
However, when he finally arrived at the ball, he was so late that everyone had left.
Hey, where did they all go? I only took a few minutes to clean up my room. Oh, wait a minute. It's Thursday. Oh, I missed the whole party by a whole week. Not only am I a slob, but I can't tell time.
The prince was distraught and had most definitely learnt his lesson.
You know what? I shall keep my room clean, so I won't lose the next invitation.
But not everything was bad luck. The princess had not found a boyfriend at the dance. So, a few weeks later, she threw another party. This time, because he had everything well organized, the prince didn't lose his invitation.
I'm dressed in record time, and with my invitation in my hand.
The prince got to the ball on time, met the princess, and they fell head over heels in love.
Oh, Prince, you are so sharp and clean. You are truly the man of my dreams. Really you are.
And they lived happily ever after.
And now on the Joe Bev Show, Love Finds General Grant. On a brisk winter evening, in the winter of 1864, the palatial Fifth Avenue Palace of Cornelius Vandergriff was brilliantly lighted with many brilliant lights. Outside the imposing front entrance, a group of small pedestrians had gathered to gape enviously at the invited guests of the 400, who were beginning to arrive in elegant equipages, expensive ball dresses, and fashionable swallowtails.
Holy gee!
Exclaimed little Frank, a little crippled newsboy who was the only support of an aged mother, as a particularly sumptuous carriage drove up and a stylishly dressed lady of 55 or 60 stepped out, accompanied by a haughty society girl and an elderly gentleman in clerical dress. It was Mrs. Rhinelander, a social leader, and her daughter, Geraldine, together with Reverend Dr. Getney, a pastor of an exclusive Fifth Avenue church.
What common-looking people.
said Mrs. Rhinelander, surveying the crowd aristocratically with her lorgnette.
Yes, aren't they?
Replied the clergyman with a condescending glance which ill befit his clerical garb.
I'm glad you don't have people like that dans votre église, Dr. Gibney,
said young Geraldine, who thought it was smart to display her proficiency in the stylish French tongue. At this moment the door of the Vandercliff residence was opened for them by an imposing footman in scarlet livery, and they passed into the abode of the elect.
Holy gee!
Repeated little Frank.
Hey, what's going on tonight?
Asked a newcomer.
Gee, don't yous know?
Answered the newsboy.
This is the Vandergriffs. And tonight, they is giving a swell dinner for General Grant. That lady what just went in was old Mrs. Rhinelander. I seen a picture in the last Harper's Weekly, and there was a story in the paper this morning that her daughter, Geraldine, was gonna marry the general.
That isn't so.
Yeah, it was just a rumor.
Well, anyway,
said little Frank.
I wish the general would hurry up and come. It's getting awful cold enough to freeze the tail off a brass monkey.
The onlookers laughed merrily, and his humorous reference to the frigid temperature, although many cast sympathetic looks at his thin, threadbare garments, and registered a kindly thought for this brave boy who had so philosophically accepted the buffets of fate.
I bet this is him now,
cried Frank, and all waited expectantly as a vehicle drove up. The cabman jumped out of his box and held the carriage door open.
Here you are, Mrs. Flowers,
he said, touching his hat respectfully. A silver peal of rippling laughter sounded from the interior of the carriage.
Why, Jerry,
Came in velvet tones addressed to the coachman.
you mustn't be so formal just because I have come to New York from the South to live. Call me Miss Ellie, of course, just like you did when we lived out in Kansas.
And with these words, Miss Ella Flowers, for it was she, stepped out of the carriage. A hush fell over the crowd as they caught sight of her face. A hush of silent tribute to the clear, sweet womanhood of that pure countenance. A young man on the edge of the crowd was on the verge of becoming a drunkard, burst into tears, and walked rapidly away to join the nearest church.
It's so beautiful. I can't take it. I gotta go pray. I gotta find a church. It's just too much. She's too pretty.
A prostitute, who had been plying her nefarious trade on the avenue, sank to her knees to pray for the strength to go back to her aged parents on the farm.
Amen.
Another young man, catching sight of Ella's pure face, vowed to write home to his old mother and send her money he had been expending in the city on drinks and dissipation.
Ah, yes, I better send a telegram to my old mom. Yes, I think I owe her a favor. But first a drink, yeah. Godfrey Daniels, don't want to rush things.
And well might these city people be affected by the glimpse of the sweet noble virtue which shone forth so radiantly in this Kansas girl's countenance. Although born in Jersey City, Ella had moved with her parents to the West at an early age. She had grown up in the open country where a man's a man, and women led clean, sweet, womanly lives. Out in the pure air of God's green places, and amid kindly, simple, big-hearted folks, little Ella had blossomed and thrived, the pride of the whole country, and as she had grown into womanhood, there was many a masculine heart beat a little faster for her presence, and many a manly blush of admiration came into the features of her admirers, as she whirled gracefully with them in the innocent pleasure of a simple country dance. But on her 18th birthday, her parents had passed on to the great beyond, and the heartbroken Ella had come east to live with Mrs. Montgomery, her aunt, in Jersey City. This lady, being socially prominent in New York's 400, was of course quite ambitious that her pretty little niece from the West should also enter society. For the last 3 months, therefore, Ella had been feted at all the better-class homes in New York and Jersey City, and as Mrs. Vandergriff and the Fifth Avenue social leader was in the same set as Ella's aunt, it was only natural that when making out her list of guests for dinner in honor of General Grant, she should include the beautiful niece of her friend. As Ella stepped from the carriage, her gaze fell upon little Frank, the crippled newsboy, and her eyes quickly filled with tears, for social success had not yet caused her to forget that blessed are the weak. Taking out her purse, she gave Frank a silver dollar and a warm look of sympathy as she passed into the house.
Holly jeepers, there went an angel,
whispered the little cripple, and many who heard him silently echoed that thought in their hearts. Nor were they far from wrong. But even an angel is not free from temptation, and by letting Ella into society, her aunt was exposing the girl to the whisperings of Satan, whisperings of things material rather than things spiritual. Many a girl just as pure as Ella had found her standards gradually lowered and her moral character slowly weakened by the contact with the so-called refined and cultured infidels one meets in fashionable society. Many a father and mother whose ambition had caused them to have their daughter go out into society had bitterly repented of that step as they watched the poor girl gradually succumbing to the temptations of the world. Let her who thinks it is smart to be in society consider that our brothels, with their red plush curtains, their hardwood floors, and their luxurious appointments, are filled largely with the worn-out belles and debutantes of fashionable society. The next minute, a bugle call sounded down the street, and up drove a team of prancing greys. 2 soldiers sprang down from the coachman's box and stood at rigid attention while the door of the carriage opened and out stepped General Ulysses S. Grant. A murmur of admiration swept over the crowd at the sight of his manly, inspiring features, in which the clean-cut virility of a life free from dissipation was accentuated by a neatly trimmed black beard. His erect military bearing, his neat, well-fitted uniform, but above all his frank, open face proclaimed him a man's man, a man among men. A cheer burst from the lips of the onlookers, and the brave but modest general lowered his eyes and blushed as he acknowledged their greeting. "Men and women," he said, in a voice which, although low, one could see was accustomed to being obeyed, "I thank you for your cheers. It makes my heart rejoice to hear them, for I know you are not cheering me personally, but only as one of the many men who are fighting for the cause of liberty and freedom, and for—" The general's voice broke a little, but he mastered his emotion and went on. For the flag we all love." At this, he pulled from his pocket an American flag and held it up so that all could see. Cheer after cheer rent the air. Tears came to the general's eyes at this mark of devotion to the common cause.
"Wipe the damn rebels off the face of the earth, goddamn 'em!" shouted a too enthusiastic member of the crowd, who I fear was a little worse for drunk. In an instant, General Grant had stepped up to him and fixed upon him those fearless blue eyes. "My man," said the general, "it hurts me to hear you give vent to those oaths.
especially in the presence of ladies. Soldiers do not curse, and I think you would do well to follow their example." The other lowered his head shamefully.
General,
He said,
you're right. I apologize.
A smile lit up the general's handsome features, and he extended his hand to the other.
Shake on it.
He said simply, and as the crowd roared his approval of this speech, the two men shook. Meanwhile, within the Vandercliff home, all were agog with excitement and expectation. An expectation of the arrival of the distinguished guest. Expensively dressed ladies fluttered here and there among the elegant appointments. Servants in stylish livery passed to and fro with trays of wine and other spirituous liquors. At the sound of the cheering outside, the haughty Mrs. Rhinelander patted her daughter Geraldine nervously, and between mother and daughter passed a glance of understanding, for both felt that tonight, if ever, was Geraldine's opportunity to win the handsome and popular general. The doorbell rang, and a hush fell over the chattering assemblage. Then came the proud announcement from the doorman.
General Ulysses S. Grant.
And all the society belles crowded forward around the guest of honor. It had been rumored that the general, being a soldier, was ignorant of social etiquette, but such proved to be far from the case. Indeed, he handled himself with such an ease of manner that he captivated all, and for each and every young miss he had an apt phrase or a pretty compliment, greatly to their delight.
Pleased to know you. Why, glad to shake your hand.
Glad to shake the hand of such a pretty girl.
What a nice little hand you've got.
I wish I might hold it all the evening. With these and kindred pleasantries, the general won the way into the graces of Mrs. Vandergriff's fair guests, and many a female heart fluttered in her bosom as she gazed into the clear blue eyes of the soldier and listened to his well-chosen, tactful words.
And how is the dear general this evening?
This in the affected tone of old Mrs. Rhinelander as she forced her way through the crowd.
Why, finer than silk,
replied he, and he added solicitously,
I hope you have recovered from your lumbago, Mrs. Rhinelander.
Oh, quite,
she answered.
And here is Geraldine, General.
And the ambitious mother pushed her daughter forward.
Comment vous portez-vous, mon général?
Said Geraldine in French.
I hope we can have a nice little tete-a-tete tonight.
And she fawned upon her prey in a manner that would have sickened a less artificial gathering. Were there not some amid all that fashionable throng in whom ideals of purity and true womanhood lived, some who cared enough for the sacredness of real love to cry upon this hollow mockery that was being used to ensnare the simple, honest soldier? There was only one, and she was at the moment entering the drawing-room for the purpose of being presented to the general. Need I name her? Ella, for it was she, had been upstairs busying herself with her toilette when General Grant had arrived, and she now hurried forward to pay her homage to the great soldier. And then, as she caught sight of his face, she stopped suddenly, and a deep crimson blush spread over her features. She looked again, and then drew back behind a nearby portiere, with her heart beating wildly. Well, did Ella remember where she had seen that countenance before? And as she stood there trembling, the whole scene of her folly came back to her? It had happened in Kansas, just before her parents died. On one sunny May morning, she had gone for a walk. Her footsteps had led her to the banks of a secluded lake, where she often went when she wished to be alone. Many an afternoon had Ella dreamed idly away on this shore, but that day, for some reason, she had felt unusually full of life, and not at all like dreaming. Obeying a thoughtless but innocent impulse, With no intent of evil, she had taken off her clothes and plunged thus naked into the cool waters of the lake. After she had swam around a little, she began to realize the extent of her folly and was hurriedly swimming towards the shore when a terrific cramp had seized her lower limbs, rendering them powerless. Her first impulse to scream for help was quickly checked with a deep blush as she realized the consequences if a man should hear her call. For nearby was an encampment of Union soldiers, none of them whom she knew. The perplexed and helpless girl was in sore straits, and was slowly sinking for the third time when a bearded stranger in a soldier's uniform appeared on the bank and dove into the water. To her horror, he swam rapidly towards her. But her shame was soon changed to joy when she realized that he was purposely keeping his eyes tight shut. With a few swift, powerful strokes, he reached her side, and, blushing deeply, took off his blue coat, fastened it around her, opened his eyes, and swam with her to the shore. Carrying her to where she had left her clothes, he stayed only long enough to assure himself that she had completely recovered the use of her limbs. And eventually, to spare her further embarrassment, he vanished as quickly and as mysteriously as he had appeared. Many a night after that had Ella lain awake, thinking of the splendid features and the even more splendid conduct of this unknown knight who wore the uniform of the Union Army.
Oh, how I love him. Really I do.
She would whisper to herself.
But, oh, how he must despise me.
She would cry, and her pillow was often wet with tears of shame and mortification at her folly.
Boo-hoo-hoo. Oh, boo-hoo-hoo.
It was shortly after this episode that her parents had taken sick and passed away. Ella had come east, and had given up hope of ever seeing her rescuer again. You may imagine her feelings then, when on entering the drawing room at the Vandergriffs, she discovered that the stranger who had so gallantly and tactfully rescued her from a watery grave was none other than General Ulysses S. Grant. The poor girl was torn by a tumult of contrary emotions. Suppose she should remember her face? She blushed at the thought. And besides, what chance had she to win such a great man's heart in competition with these society girls like Geraldine Rhinelander, who had been abroad and spoke French? At that moment, one of the livery servants approached the general with a tray full of wine glasses. So engrossed was the soldier hero in talking to Geraldine, or rather in listening to her alluring chatter, that he did not at first notice what was being offered him.
Oh, will you have a drink of champagne wine, General?
Said Mrs. Vandergriff, who stood near. The general raised his head and frowned as if he did not understand.
Come, mon General,
cried Geraldine gaily.
We shall drink. Et votre succès dans la guerre.
And the flighty girl raised a glass of wine on high. Several of the guests crowded around, and all were about to drink to the general's health. "Stop!" cried the general, suddenly realizing what was being done, and something in the tone of his voice made everyone pause. "Madam," he said, turning to Mrs. Vandergriff, "am I to understand that there is liquor in those glasses?"
Why, yes, General,
said the hostess, smiling uneasily.
It is just a little champagne wine.
"Madam," said the general, "it may be just champagne wine to you, but just champagne wine has ruined many a poor fella, and to me all alcoholic beverages are an abomination. I cannot consent, madam, to remain under your roof if they are to be served. I have never taken a drop, and I have tried to stamp it out of the army, and I owe it to my soldiers to decline to be a guest at a house where wine and liquor are served." An excited buzz of comment arose as the general delivered this ultimatum. A few there were who secretly approved his sentiments, but there were far too many, few in numbers, and consent indulgence in alcohol had weakened their wills, so they dared not stand forth. An angry flush appeared on the face of the hostess, for in society, good form is more important than courage and ideals, and by his frank statement, General Grant had violently violated the canons of correct social etiquette.
Very well, Mr. Grant,
she said, stressing the Mr.
If that's the way you feel about it. Stop!
Cried an unexpected voice, and to the amazement of all, Ella Flowers stepped forward, her teeth clenched and her eyes blazing.
Stop!
She repeated.
He is right. Really he is. The liquor evil is one of the worst curses of modern society, of modern civilization. Really it is. And if General Grant leaves, so do I.
Mrs. Vandergrift hesitated for a moment, and then suddenly forced a smile.
Why, Ella dear, of course General Grant is right,
she said, for it was well known in financial circles that her husband, Mr. Vandergrift, had recently borrowed heavily from Ella's uncle.
There will not be a drop of wine served here tonight. And now, General, shall we go to dinner? Would you be so kind as to lead the way, Mrs. Rhinelander?
The hostess had recovered her composure, and smiling sweetly at the guest of honor, gave orders to the servants to remove the wine glasses. But General Grant did not hear her. He was looking at Ella Flowers, and as he gazed at the sweet beauty of her countenance, he seemed to feel rising within him something which he'd never felt before. Something which made everything else seem petty and trivial. And as he looked into her eyes and she looked into his, he read her answer, the only answer true womanhood can make to clean, worthy manhood.
Shall we go à la salle à manger?
Sounded a voice in his ears, and Geraldine's sinuous arms were thrust through his. General Grant took the proffered talon and gently removed it from him. Mrs. Rhinelander, he said firmly, I am taking this young lady as my partner. And suiting the action to the word, he graciously extended his arm to Ella, who took it with a pretty blush. It was General Grant's turn to blush when the other guests, with a few exceptions, applauded his choice loudly and made way enthusiastically as the handsome couple advanced to the brilliantly lighted dining room. But although the hostess had provided that most costly of viands, I am afraid that the brave general did not fully appreciate them, for in his soul was the joy of a strong man who had found his mate, and in his heart was the singing of the eternal song, I love her, I love her, I love her. It was only too apparent to the other guests what had happened, and to their credit be it said that they heartily approved his choice, for Mrs. Rhinelander and her scheming daughter Geraldine had made countless enemies with their haughty manners, whereas the sweet simplicity of Ella Flowers had won her numerous friends. And all laughed merrily when General Grant, in his after-dinner speech, said flowers instead of flour when speaking of provisioning the army. A slip which caused both the General and Miss Flowers to blush furiously, greatly to the delight of all the good-natured guests. All the world loves a lover. Truer words were never spoken. Truer words were never penned. After dinner, while the other men, according to the usages of best society, were filling the air of the dining room with the fumes of nicotine, the general, who did not use tobacco, excused himself, amid many sly winks from the other men, and wandered out into the conservatory. There he found Ella.
General,
she began. Miss Flowers, said the strong man simply, call me Ulysses. And there let us leave them. Gary Cooper as Ulysses S. Grant on The Joe Bev Show.